Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gents. Has everyone got their glasses suitably filled? That's the main thing. Suitably filled, yeah? Very warm welcome. Thank you for coming today to celebrate the launch of the third book by A.B. Patterson, here at Henry Kenmare, Actual Service. I'm Alan Gates. I'm here today as Master of Ceremonies, and I had the pleasure of being MC at Andrew's last book launch for Harry's Quest back in January 2019, and that was the sequel to the award-winning first novel by A.B. Patterson, Harry's Well. Well done. This latest book is a bit of a different take for Harry. It's a collection of short stories written in the first person, with each story covering a different scenario in Harry's life and detached from the continuity of the first two novels in the series. In a moment I'm going to hand over to Andrew to introduce Harry, but just to cover off some of the housekeeping here today first. First of all, thank you for bearing with us during these COVID times. Okay, we've been very lucky to have this here today, and thank goodness we're not in Melbourne right now. Our hearts go out to those guys, but this would have been very difficult down that part of the world. We won't be taking a break during today's launch, but please feel free to visit the bar as and when you feel you need to. There's nothing worse than having an empty glass there. Is there, Andrew? And see, we've got backups. Great. And today's launch is being videoed in the interest of transparency. Us being anti-corruption professionals, we've got to make that disclosure, Andrew, haven't we? Now, it will just be Andrew and myself in the frame of the video, but just for purposes of audio, of course, if anyone asks any questions and doesn't wish to be identified on video, I'll just make that fully known to you all today. Andrew's going to put the video up on YouTube next week, Andrew, on your channel and your website. Fantastic. Okay, in a moment I'm going to more formally hand over to Andrew to read a few passages, and we'll engage in more of a discussion about his writing and the stories that make up the collection in this new book. And I had to think about this, Andrew. I was starting to think about the passages you might like to read, and I was trying to think of some that might not, you know, what are you going to find that's not pornographic? Or maybe you're not really bothered, but that might be your challenge here today. So I'll be keen to see how you go. And then I'm going to open the floor up for some questions, and please feel free to ask any you may have. This is a chance to find out more about the man behind the book that we're here to celebrate today. Most of you will know Andrew, and you will know about the vast experience and the career he has had, which has really undoubtedly shaped and influenced his choice of stories and scenarios. But please feel free to use this opportunity to ask any questions. Now, once Andrew's been thoroughly cross-examined, we're going to break for some book signing and of sales, and of course, if anyone wishes to purchase a copy of the previous two books, I'm sure Andrew would be happy to do that, as well as to sign them for you. So, without further ado, over to you, Andrew.
All right, thank you, Alan. I should say Dr. Yates. I'll just flick to Alan for a minute. He's this year been awarded his PhD, so now Dr. Yates. Great achievement. In corruption studies, of course. And what a week it is for corruption. Okay, to start with, I'll be coming back to that topic, don't worry. I want to start with a few thank yous, as always. First and foremost, thank you to the Glebe Hotel for hosting our event as per the last two book launches, to Zolman and Dan, the owners of the establishment, who've made it possible within obviously the rules that we're subject to. Hence there was a limited number of seats, and I had people getting hold of me towards the end of the week saying, I've tried to book in and I can't, and I said, yeah, I'm sorry. It's just the way it goes, unfortunately. And thank you very much to Hannah behind the bar there, who will be looking after us for the alcohol for the afternoon. Okay, in relation to obviously publishing books, apart from the writing, there's a lot of other stuff goes into it, and a lot of support you get as a writer putting it together. So a few thank yous I just want to put on the record. First and foremost, of course, my lovely partner Ruth, currently on the video camera over there, who puts up with my shit all around the apartment, and generally the writer want to be full-time writer, but part-time writer and all the rest of it. And Ruth has also, of course, been a beta reader for the stories as I've been writing them. As has my sister Katie over in France, and and with Mr. Gates here, Alan's also been a beta reader for the stories. In terms of the production for the book, I just want to mention the cover designer, J.T. Lindroos, who's an American Finnish designer, and I think you'll probably agree he nailed the concept for the cover of this book. It's quite superb. And if you've already picked up your copy of the book and you probably had a flick through it, you'll notice there's interior artwork as well, which is something which you don't often see in books these days, but something I wanted to introduce into the format, much in line with some of the anthology magazines that I read, which I'll come to shortly. So again, another American, Ram Scott, who's the artist who did the interior drawings, and again did an excellent job on those, capturing the mood of the various stories. In terms of the production here in Australia, Publishers, the publishing company I use in Queensland, who facilitate self-publishers but organise all the stuff that I don't want to learn how to do. And Andy McDermott is the principal up there and does a fantastic job with his team, and I've used him now for all three of the books that I've done. And also on the production side of things, Stephen Hill, who's somewhere in here. Where's Stephen gone? There he is over the back. Stephen, who runs his own design company called Dilunio, and he does the poster work and the bookmarks that you would have seen, and all my other various bits of design work, so thank you for Stephen. Alright, which brings me on to, they're on the acknowledgements page at the back of the book, but a couple of editors I want to say thank you to in America. So I got into writing short stories through reading Switchblade magazine, and I've got a copy somewhere here. So I'll have these on the table afterwards for people to have a look at. So it's an anthology noir, it's called. The editor puts that out in his website saying they publish the stories that nobody else is prepared to. Great read. So I got into short stories from there, and Scotch, the first story, short story that I wrote to send into submission, got accepted. It's actually the story that opens the new collection, and I'll be reading a passage from that shortly to give you the flavour of that one. And I've had two more subsequently published, but it sort of got me into writing it, and then I eventually decided, well, I want to put together a collection of them, which is what I've done. And the other editor I want to say thank you to is J.D. Graves in Texas in the US, who publishes Iconoclash Review magazine, which we also have there. And I've had a short story, not a Harry short story, a different type of short story, published there as well. So I want to, on the record, to acknowledge both of those editors over in the US and thank them for their support and accepting my work. Which then leads me into talking about anthology magazines. You will have a flyer I put around beforehand, which has got the three current anthologies which I read. Actually been published in two of them, so Switchblade, Iconoclash Review, and Pulp Modern. So if you do like your hard-boiled and your noir and your pulp crime type stories, they are great anthologies to read. And the beauty of reading anthologies is, apart from getting the short stories and the juicy morsels in a very short space of time, you also get exposure to a whole range of authors in a short space of time, which is really good in terms of then being able to go and find other works that they've done if you like their writing style. So we are, and we're going to be having a raffle at the end of the event today with some giveaways of anthology magazines. So giveaways, in theory, because like everything, didn't quite go according to plan. So there will be 5 lots of giveaways of a copy each of Switchblade, Pulp Modern and Iconoclash Review. And I'll be drawing the names out from the booking list from all of you who booked in, and you all did book in, of course. Now, the only problem with that is that 2 of the magazines, despite having arranged over 6 weeks ago, didn't arrive in time. So, I will be posting them out to the winners in due course. But I do recommend anthology magazines if you like your crime writing, and a really good way of getting a sample of different styles and different authors out there. So feel free to take those flyers home with you that I've put around there. So. Okay, I think I've covered off all the thank yous I needed, so back to you, I think, Mr. Yates.
That's me. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, I think it's fair to say that the award-winning success of Harry's World was astounding, and this was closely followed by the anticipated sequel, Harry's Quest. I'd just like to read an excerpt from a review on Amazon Australia, which I think nicely describes our main character, Harry, the flavour of the book and Andrew's approach. So here we go. Be forewarned, P.I. Harry Kenmare is one of those protagonists you find you must warm up to as you learn more about the circumstances that fashioned him into the man he is. At the beginning of Harry's story, it's tempting to dismiss him out of hand as a boozy, cigarette-smoking bloke with an insatiable appetite for the services of prostitutes. We like them already. Yet, as you learn more about Harry's past, you begin to understand his vices are the superficial bits. It's only when you dig deep into the character you discover the virtues Patterson promises. In a review of Harry's World I read before purchasing the book, the reviewer's review revealed she struggled with what she described as stereotypical female portrayals and the tacky sexual urges of Harry. That, I think, is a view we've come to expect from the politically correct woke generation in the #MeToo era. I think it also is an unsophisticated and unfair assessment. Clearly, Patterson's aim, writing a book set squarely in a seedy noir world, was bang on target. Read any Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett classic, and you can find similar stereotypical female portrayals and tacky sexual urges, because it is part of a parcel of the hard-boiled noir genre. Perhaps Patterson's earthly realism style that features graphic sex against a vivid, sordid urban background is a bit more in your face than some readers may be comfortable with. Frankly, I rather enjoyed Patterson's somewhat twisted, over-the-top graphic style and loved his crisp, authentic dialogue, titillating decadence, and his bent for blending in rich, distinct characters in his effective quasi-historical way. Sure, there were parts of Harry's World where I was surprised, shocked, and at times even a bit disgusted. Well done, Andrew. But that is part of the charm. While very good, this book is probably not meant for the faint of heart. Overall, I found Harry's World has excellent atmospherics, mood, well-developed characters, noir sensibility, and even a good bit of humour thrown into the bargain to counterbalance the darker bits. The plotting is well thought out, sometimes surprising, but above all, always credible. Harry's World is anything but the typical detective story. It's the story of a flawed hero doing his best, to help rid the world of some of its purest evil. It's gritty, sometimes rude, and dark in parts, but a thoroughly absorbing read. If you enjoyed hard-boiled noir, you will like this book. What a testament indeed. Well done, Andrew. Yeah. I wanted to showcase this review, and there's quite a few to choose from, which is great in itself. But for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, this reviewer gives great praise in a number of respects. The skillfulness that comes with those well-deserved credentials is achieved through practice and persistence. And to hit home on a few of the points that the review touches upon, the atmospherics, the mood, the character development, the humour. But to master this craft, it takes diligence, and this achievement is truly awe-inspiring. I'm sure you would agree. The second of the 2 points, which relates to one of the specific points that the previous reviewer made, is that this reviewer has criticised the previous review, which referred to the stereotypical female portrayals and the tacky sexual urges of Harry, a view we've come to expect from the politically correct woke generation in the #MeToo era. Andrew's writing is as it is. It's not for everybody. And I have to admire, though, his temerity and resolution, because some people may conform to what the mass media may wish to see, or what the publishing houses may wish to write. But again, Andrew has been steadfast in his approach, and I think that's something to be admired. So I think this quite aptly labels you, Andrew, as the bad boy of Australian crime fiction. Does that resonate with you?
I can live with that.
Okay, sounds good to me. So, I'm going to ask a question here, Andrew. Before we get into more of a discussion about your writing and the stories, I might ask you to let us know a little bit more about Harry, perhaps his bio, his credentials, maybe a backdrop to the man, and quite possibly another passage of the book. Are you happy with that?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, not for everybody. I don't think I'll be getting an invitation to Oprah's book club anytime soon. That's life. Not quite sure what Oprah would make of Harry. All right, so I think I might start. Alan's mentioned, and I think it's probably on the list to discuss in more detail. That one of the key differences between the short stories and the novels is that for those, and I know many of you have read the novels, they're of course written in third person, which for me works well for the novels. The short stories are written in the first person, so it's got a degree of closeness to Harry, and of course the novels don't have. And then there's a reason for that, which we can unpack a bit more, I think, in the discussions we go through. But anyway, so I thought, being in the first person, I thought at the beginning of the collection, apart from having my normal introduction at the front of the book, I'll let Harry introduce himself. So, here he is. G'day, I'm Harry Kenmare, private investigator. I used to be a cop, detective sergeant, until I got the arse for belting a rock spider. A child molester to most of you. Well, of course I belted the prick. I just lost my daughter, Orla, to scum like him. Orla was raped and murdered by paedophile animals. And, being only human, that has shaped me as a man since then. You got a problem with that? Guess what? Here's 50 cents, go call someone who cares. Orla's mother, my very ex-wife, left at the same time. Decided her yoga instructor was more sensitive to her needs. He was a pretentious arsewipe, but he had inherited money. Yes, I married shallow, as it turns out. Not the first bloke down that baited burrow. And then she shagged a couple of other detectives. Sure, it was to spite me. Reading another detective's missus was a no-no, totally against the Brotherhood's code. Anyway, the arsewipe yoga instructor got done for dealing herbal remedies, went to prison, and the ex became his ex too. Some degree of karma, maybe. No doubt she's off now making some other poor bastard's life an abject misery. Anyhow, my motto now is here for a good time, not a long time. And I live by it. I smoke, I drink like a fish, I eat rich food, and I bed every good sort I can charm back to my apartment. I love the ladies. And what in days gone by was described as a libertine. And if you've got a problem with that, hear this. I don't give a flying rat's ass. Enough of my loves. What about the other side of the ledger? I hate injustice, I hate hypocrisy, I hate misogyny, I hate bullies, and I hate the establishment. A long list, no shortage of candidates in Sydney. And wherever I can deliver karma, I'll do so in spades. You might love me, or you might hate me, but you'll never forget me. Cheers, Harry. So that's the man. You're reading the first story, or do you want to say anything else for a moment?
No, you carry on.
All right. So I'll just read a passage, the opening to the first story. So this, as I said, was the first short story I wrote, and which was published in Switchblade magazine, coming out of Los Angeles, and it's called Little Rich Street Girl. So this gives you a feeling for Harry's escapades as a private eye. And as Alan warned you up front, not for the faint-hearted, but I think most of you have been to my launches before, so you know that already. Fair warning given. Okay, Little Rich Street Girl. Coagulating semen clung to the lock of grubby blonde hair dangling next to her cheek. Obviously not all of her previous load had gone down her throat. I guess she wasn't concerned about the finer points of her appearance. On these seedy streets, appearances were shallow, skanky, and purely commercial. It was about semen and cash, giving and receiving. Prices depended on the delivery context. Oral, vaginal or anal, condom or bareback, for the true fatalists, and how desperate the girl was for her next hit. I figured Smokey, as she introduced herself, had got fixed up in the last couple of hours. Judging by the languid way she flopped herself into the front seat of my hire car, and the slightly heavy-lidded look to her bright blue eyes. Not even the opiates could erase their natural sparkle. She gave me a lazy, lopsided smile, unabashedly slid her hand into my crutch, and looked me in the eye. So, what would handsome like today? Sexy voice. That, married with a hand gently kneading my tackle, got some distinct movement. She detected it. Well, it was her job. Handsome here likes what he sees then. A statement, not a question. My cock had neither eyes nor common sense, but I'm no orphan there in the male world. You got me, I smiled. What's an offer, sexy babe? What's your name? They call me Harry. Actually, that is my name. I've been called a lot of other things along the way. Things your mother would wash your mouth out with soap for saying, if your mother was a washing kind of lady, that is. Smokey's hand tightened on my balls. She tried to look serious. You're not a pig, are you? Well, I'm not. Used to be, years ago. Now I'm a hard-drinking PI, scrapping around for work and living as hedonistically as possible, cash reserves allowing. After all, life's short, play hard. A motto I've always liked. Another one is that attack is the best form of defence. So I responded to the inquisitorial clutching of my balls by grabbing one of her breasts, squeezing hard, and doing a much better severe impersonation. No, I'm fucking not. Are you? She wasn't ready for the counter-attack. Mental reflexes too slow. She headed back to familiar territory, regaining the come fuck me smile and putting enough tongue along her lips to make a bishop bar up. It's your eyes, she murmured. They've got a copper's look to them. Yeah, not much I can do about that. Ex-coppers always have a certain vigilance to their eyes, it's true. Smokey had picked up some street smarts all right, as young as she was. Thought I'd throw her a bone, figuratively speaking, you understand. Well spotted, long time ago. Now I'm a private detective. She nodded slowly. Cool. And what would Mr. Private Detective like to do with his cock today? What's on the menu, sexy? I kept my hand on her breast, but gently now. She seemed to like it. 50 for head, 100 for straight, extra 50 for anal, double it up for bareback. I looked at her hand rubbing my crotch, then up her arm to the fresh track marks. Bareback? Are you kidding? You'd have to be on a serious death wish to do anything out here without a rubber. That's quite a menu, I said, smiling at her. She'd got me as hard as a rock, and it had been a while since I last trained the lizard. What was a man to do?
Thanks for choosing that good excerpt, Andrew. Okay, thank you. Since finishing Harry's quest, I think the good thing is, you know, we're all in agreement. We've all been looking forward to reading more about Harry, what he's up to, what's next for him. And I, of course, for one, I'm looking forward to the next in the succession of books, Harry's Grail. But what I enjoyed in this approach with Harry Kenmare PI was that we have an opportunity to read about a number of different experiences and things that Harry is up to. And through his eyes in the first person, which we don't get through the succession of novels, do we? The short, sharp literacy, I think, was a great approach. I, for one, having read the, being a reader, found it absolutely, great to read these short, sharp books and actually really enjoy each one, put it down, and then can't wait to pick up the next. And I'm really pleased you found this niche, Andrew, a success through the Switchblade medium. I think that's great. Harry has already received, this book, Harry, Kenmare PI, has already received a notable review in the US since being launched back in August. So that's not bad, is it? Being only 2 months and in the USA. And I'd just like to read this 5-star review from the editor of Pulp Modern magazine, which Andrew showed you up to you earlier today. So it's not just from Everyday Joe, this is this is from somebody who knows their stuff, and on Amazon US, so very apt, of course. A.B. Patterson's Harry Kenmare stomps through a seedy underworld, solving cases and bedding a lot of women, and a lot is inevitable. This book is the precise opposite of what the current puritanical mainstream would prefer you read. It breaks every modern taboo and creates the same sort of freewheeling atmosphere we might expect from a 1970s drive-in movie, the kind made far away from Hollywood. The writing is crisp and straightforward, the definition of hard-boiled. It's a fast read, but throws a lot of exploitation elements at the reader, while sneaking in some very sharp social criticism of the author's native land, Australia. Much of that criticism, I feel, could be applied to governments and bureaucracies around the world. If you've got tough skin, this is a very enjoyable read. That is fantastic acclaim for his brand new novel. Very well deserved. So I'm going to get into a bit of a discussion with you, Andrew, and I might put you on the spot with a few of these, questions around your new
This
book.
is grilling, is it?
This is a grilling. This is a cross-examination. It might not be at ICAC standards, but I'll give you my best shot. Okay. We've seen a lot of that this week. Okay. You touched upon, and I mentioned it as well just now, writing this book in the first person. I want to know really, how did you find the process of writing these stories? And I've got a sort of three-tiered question. One in the first person, which prohibits you from developing out some of the characters' biographies, which, not being a writer like yourself is, I guess, something I saw as being inhibited, I guess, of writing in the first person. And you can't develop Trev's bio, you can't develop the girl's bio and things like that. How did you manage to contain so much information in such a short text, at the beginning, the middle, and end? And how did you manage to do this without disrupting the continuity of the series of novels? So I guess any of those elements or a combination of them, it'd be great to just know how you found writing this book when compared to the others.
Okay, that's triple barrel one to start with. Okay, I think I'll tackle the first person, third person issue first up. So, obviously writing from the first person, it's the character speaking to you from the pages, which gives you, I think, a closeness and immediacy to the writing, which in a third person narration you won't have nearly as much of. From a writer's perspective, the key difference is that with a first person narrative, you've only got the first person there, the character, who you can explore in any depth. The only way you can find out anything about other characters is through dialogue with the main character, because he, in this case he, is telling the story. With the third person, which is what I write my novels in, and the reason I do that for the novels is because it gives me the room then to explore the points of view of other characters as I want to. So you'll notice, particularly in Harry's quest, the second novel, as we start to get more of a cast in terms of people around Harry, there are switches in there, so we hear what, for instance, his offside Trev is thinking on certain occasions. We hear what Tanya, one of the girls, is thinking. And it gives you that ability to do that. First person, of course, you can't do that. You're very much stuck inside one person's head. Now, from a personal perspective, for the short story, I find that works well. It makes it nice and close, and it gives it that sharp feel. Having said that, I mean, I got into hard-boiled fiction originally reading Raymond Chandler, as no doubt many have. And of course, he wrote all the Philip Marlowe novels in the first person, which he did brilliantly. I mean, Chandler is an absolute genius, was an absolute genius in the art form, and really set the standard. It works for him, but for me, for the novels, I'd much rather stick with the third person. But the short stories, I think it works well to have that first person closeness. And obviously, I think it ties into, and it comes into the second point of your question, Alan, with the short form and being able to tell a story. You've only got a very limited number of pages for a short story. When you write for magazines, they all have word limits. So the first short story, which I read you the opening passage from, Little Rich Street Girl, the word limit for Switchblade magazine is 4,500 words for a story, and that's it. They won't accept anything once you go over the word limit. So when I first wrote that story and did the first draft of it, my story was 7,000 words long. So it becomes quite an exercise in editing in terms of what to take out in order to get the word form down. You get very good at that in terms of looking at the language you use, and okay, every word has to count because you are on that word limit. So that's a discipline that you learn from that, but that keeps you within the constraints then. Now there are a couple of, obviously within the collection there, 3 of the stories there were published in Switchblade, so they were subject to the word limit originally. The other stories have been written, well, 2 of them were written for magazine submissions, so they are limited in that respect. And 2 slightly longer ones in there, which are about 8,000 words, which I wrote deliberately for this volume. But they're still short stories. I think the hardest bit with that is when you've got your draft down there, and then you've got to chop down. As you can imagine, chopping down from 7,000 to 4,500 words requires a lot of material to go. And it really is, as the phrase that's used in writing circles, you've got to kill your darlings. And you really have to try and decide, well, what are you prepared to lose in order to get the word limit down. And then you get a bit more disciplined, I think, in terms of when you are writing. you become much more critical about the words you're using and getting rid of anything that's not absolutely necessary for the story. So that was the second arm of the question. I'm trying to remember what the third bit was now.
That's right. You've done really well so far. The continuity, I think without detracting from the stories, because Harry's quest really develops out, I think, a lot about Harry. It talks a lot more about Orla. And I think without dipping into those, without giving too much away to the reader who might not have read those two books, how do you manage that? That's quite an art, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when you've written two novels with the character, and obviously in the length of a novel, and one of the beauties of a novel is that you can start to explore people's backstory and their psychology and their motivations in depth. And you can explore the other characters, particularly if you're writing a third-person narrative. With a short story, of course, you don't have any time. A short story has to be short, sharp action, straight in from the first line, punch hard, and that's it, get out of the story. Because that's all you've got the room to do. So it is a different writing form in that regard. So, and I think that's why it does work better from the first-person perspective as well, because it's only Harry I've got to worry about saying anything in these. I don't have to worry about the other characters apart from dialogue. So you don't have room to explore other characters as such. So in terms of matching up the novels, because some of the characters flow over into these, but each of the short stories is a standalone story. So they can each be read on their own, which is the whole idea of short stories. So whilst there are 7 of them collected in the volume, none of them rely on any of the others in terms of storyline. So they do all stand alone in that respect.
Wonderful, Andrew. One of the other things I think that comes through in this book, but also in the first two, is how Harry might, I guess, juggle his own ethics, his own principles. And I know this is something that's very passionate to you about ethics, and I'd be keen to know, when you wrote Harry, and as you've written Harry over the years, how do you see that Harry himself manages these ethical dilemmas? He obviously has some degree of core principles that run through him, but obviously some of the dilemmas he encounters through this succession of short stories in a recent book, I guess, push him to the edge. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think killing people could be defined as pushing you to the edge. Somewhat, yeah. Look, it's an interesting one. I think with crime writing, one of the things that appeals to me about the hard-boiled genre, and so you're not writing about cops. I mean, the cops come in as side characters on occasion. The main person is not a cop, he's an ex-cop. And the beauty, I think, with writing that is that you have leeway then for that character to have, he's got a moral code, absolutely, but it's very much his own moral code, and it certainly doesn't match up with what the law says all the time, or what some other people might think was an appropriate moral code. So he's a flawed protagonist or a flawed hero in that regard. But one of the appeals for me in terms of writing crime is there's a lot of particularly crime writers who have worked in law enforcement, they'll tend to write police procedurals, and most of them do a very, very good job at it because they've been there, they've done the work, they can tell a really good crime story. But police procedurals, as their name implies, the main characters are always police. And the limitation for me in writing that is that unless your police character is going to be inherently bad, they've got to follow rules, because that's how policing is. So unless you're going to write about a cop who is entirely corrupt and doesn't care about the rules, your character is then going to be constrained by the rules that the police are actually constrained by. I personally think it's far more fun to be able to write with a PI who's not constrained by those rules. Does Harry break the law on occasion? Absolutely. Hasn't been caught yet. So I think that way you can, I think, tell a different type of story. But it also appeals to me in that you can get a level of justice in there, which may not exist in real life through the official channels. And look, I mean, in terms of crime writing, the quest for justice is one of the timeless themes that crops up in crime writing. And it's one of the reasons that crime writing has always, and I think will always have, such a huge following. People like to read stories about justice getting handed out, because we all see plenty of instances in life where justice doesn't get served, despite what the system is set up to do. And so, one of the fun bits about writing these sort of characters is, of course, you can have result. You get to determine what the result is. So, if you want to serve out some justice, you can get it served out, as brutal as it might be. So, I think, very much having a character who's not bound. Well, technically, it's bound by the law, like everybody is, but. I think the problem with writing police procedurals and getting character to go outside the law is that you may well lose the empathy of your reader with your main character. Because if you're going to depict a cop as being completely corrupt, that may well lose your reader. Part of what you want as a writer with your protagonist is you want the reader, despite his flaws and all the things people may criticise him for, you want the reader basically to be able to say, actually, I want to see him succeed. Whatever he does, I want to see him succeed. And that's, I think, the art to getting a character that people like. If your reader picks it up and they're halfway through the book and think, I really hate this character, I don't want to read it anymore, well, you failed in your job in terms of storytelling. So it's, I think that's the question.
Very good. Wonderful, thank you. And I mentioned earlier to the audience, and most of you will know that Andrew's got an extensive background and career in law enforcement, crime and corruption and all of those sorts of elements. And I know you draw upon your knowledge and experience when writing. And reflecting on one of the previous reviewers' comments, it was great to read that the reviewer considered your stories sometimes surprising but credible. And I think this was really good to actually read from a reviewer's perspective, that the way Andrew is telling it is actually surprising the reviewer about what may go on in the city underworld of Sydney. So I'm keen to know, Andrew, how alike or detached are the stories from the facts? And I'm sure a lot of people may be interested in knowing that. If you could change the names to protect the guilty.
Well, in my upcoming defamation case, I was saying it's all fiction, Your Honour. Just joking, I haven't been sued, that's fine. Look, it's, obviously a lot of the stories that I write, both in the novels and in the short stories. Short stories probably a bit more on the entertainment level than the novels. The novels are a lot of instances and scenes in them which are based to a degree or another on real life. Some are complete figments of my imagination. So those who've read Harry's World, first book, you will remember, no doubt, Club Memory. I've never been to Club Memory. Okay, so that's a complete dream. Although that fetish does exist, I did have a reader come back to me and said, "Does that fetish actually exist?" And I said, "Oh yes, it does." But I haven't been to a Club Memory. So, but there are a lot of things in the novels which are based on experiences that I've seen or things I've investigated, particularly in my police time, and also in ICAC and other investigation roles since then. I think. Yes, you need to be careful, obviously, when you fictionalise fact, or faction as it becomes called, that you need to be careful that nobody's identifiable clearly, then you do get sued. But I think the beauty of it is that you can take an incident and because you know it closely, you can bring a level of realism to it, which I think helps with the writing a lot, and from a reader's perspective. And what that reviewer seemed to be hinting at was that it therefore makes it credible, because you're not writing something completely out of your imagination. You are writing something based to a degree on something that's actually happened.
Yeah, I think to get that credible component was excellent from that reviewer. And this might come to another point as well, and I guess that's the degree of social commentary that's within this book, Andrew. You augment many of the problems that exist in society, I think, and it comes through in a number of respects at various junctures throughout the book. And I'd love to ask you to unpack that a bit more, and even maybe some of the elements associated with the freedoms of expression.
Okay, it's a big topic, and very topical these days as well. So the dedication in the book is to the freedom of expression and of course brave voices. And there's a recently formed group based in Los Angeles called the Independent Fiction Alliance, which I've started as one of the founding members of. And that's a group put together of authors who are dedicated to free speech and being able to write what you want to write. And this has become a fairly tricky area in these days. There is a lot of, particularly in mainstream publishing, I obviously self-publish, so I have a lot more freedom in that regard. But in mainstream publishing, of course, there's a lot of push that things need to be politically correct. And all these sort of issues and things you're not allowed to talk about. So hence, one of those reviewers talking about things that I covered in some of my writing. I'm a firm believer that authors should be able to write what they want to write. If people don't want to read it, well, that's fine. It's the reader's choice. But the minute we start telling authors, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to write that, that's the beginning of censorship. And I think that's a really, really slippery road to start heading down. At the same time, I mean, you need to be conscious when you're writing. You don't want to set out to be offensive unnecessarily. Being offensive necessarily, unnecessarily. So, for instance, I mean, and this is my personal perspective as a writer, and I would not make anything in my... Okay, let's break this down. So, Harry, let's stick with Harry. He's my good guy, as much as he gets up to bad things. I wouldn't have Harry saying or doing anything which was either sexist or racist, because they're obviously things that I don't approve of, and I don't want my main character doing that either. There are characters in the book who are clearly racist and sexist, but the point of having them in there is to make a point about them and about those what I view as unacceptable behaviours. At the same time, I think things like politics and religion and all the rest of it. I mean, they're fair game. If you want to, as one of the stories in here gets, Harry takes to some rather extreme Muslims. Shall we put it that way? So, I mean, that sort of story. There's no way a publishing house would touch a story like that in the current climate. But look, at the end of the day, writers need to be able to raise these. These are issues we need to see out there. We need to have a discussion about them, and that's my problem with the whole political correctness and the path we're starting to get towards censorship. Let people speak their ideas. If you don't like their ideas, take them down with better ideas and better discussion, rather than trying to silence people. Because the problem with censorship is that whilst it might seem appealing to censor people that are saying things which most of us find unpleasant, the problem is when somebody gets into charge and they've got different ideas, then they start telling you what you can think and what you can say, and that's the problem with censorship.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, very refreshing to read those in that book. Okay, before we move on to audience questions, Andrew, may I ask you to read another passage from the book, please? Just a flavour, if possible, without giving away the ending.
Absolutely. There's a few... I was just trying to find a short passage. You were talking about social. I found it. Okay. Okay, I will read a slightly longer passage to give more flavour to Harry, but Alan raised the idea about social commentary, so there's a short passage in one of the stories. This is called The Lonely Corpse, the story. But there's a short passage which I think illustrates what you were saying. So Harry and his team are off tracking down some stolen jewellery. The junkie's house was an ancient, dilapidated, weatherboard bungalow in Mascot. It was a total shithole, as you'd expect from the likes of Natasha and crew, the tenants from hell. But it did have one piece of charm, arguably. It was one of the few houses left, amongst the burgeoning jungle of shoddily built apartment blocks. It was like a mange-ridden mouse running through a pen full of pigs. The modern version of Sydney is geared to suit only 3 groups of people, none of which are Joe Citizen, who has to live, at an exorbitant cost, in this concrete abomination. No, the 21st century in Sydney is all about corrupt property developers, corrupt politicians and councillors, and corrupt bankers. I guess not so different from much of the Western world. It's an easy equation of greased palms and offshore bank accounts that leads to a housing market where quality sinks to the lowest common denominator and average citizens consign themselves to a lifetime of debt. It's the serfdom of the modern age. Okay, I'll just read the introduction to another one of the stories, subtly entitled Wankers. Alright, this is the opening scene. She had a rack that would have distracted the Catholic priest from the altar boys. My first client in a fortnight sashayed unannounced into my shitty smoke-filled office as I was pouring my first Jameson for the day. Well, it was a touch after 11 a.m. I nearly spilt the amber nectar. I was transfixed. She reached my desk and held out her hand. Carmen Garcia. I took her hand. Firm grip. I like that in a woman. It spoke volumes. Harry Kenmare, private investigator, at your service. Good. The siren's smile, combined with her rack, must have destroyed dozens of poor rogues over the years. I smiled back and I thought to myself she wasn't Carmen anything. Quite the opposite, in fact. But I kept that lame line to myself. Carmen sat down and opened her blue Gucci handbag. Matched her magnetic eyes, but I guess she worked it that way. She pulled out a cigarette case and lit up. Then she extracted 2 envelopes. One slim, the other chunkier. I like chunky envelopes almost as much as Melania's breasts. I was alternating my eyes between them and the envelopes. Look at me, Seamus. Perhaps you can play with these puppies later. She heaved her chest out dramatically to make the point. 2, actually. You've got some work to do first. Of course, you have my undivided attention, Carmen. She slid a photo across to me from the fat envelope. I could see the delicious filthy lucre stacked in there. My daughter, Solara. Runaway? Yes, family misunderstandings. I won't bore you, but I want you to find her. Bring her home? I had to ask. But I always hated those runaway jobs where retrieval was the object. A middle-aged male PI trying to persuade a young woman into a vehicle looked more sinister than it was. It risked unwanted intervention. No, she said. That surprised me. No, I'd like her home, but it has to be her choice. She's an adult, just. Bugger me, progressive parent, unusual. Cool. So, what do you want me to do? She slid the slimmer envelope towards me. Find her. Then give her this and ask her to read it. That's all you have to do. I picked it up. It was sealed. Any leads? I asked. Her best friend confided that she's doing naked dancing. Most mothers I've met would be staring into their laps at this point, but not Carmen. I suspected she'd had a bit of exotic work experience herself. Pole dancing? I asked. No. Apparently some place where you dance in a room on your own. Sounds a bit strange to me. Ah, yes. I decided not to get descriptive. I know the places. Strip shows without a pole. I could be the master of understatement when required. I'll take your word for it, she murmured. She pushed the fat envelope over. I tried not to be too speedy in grabbing Big Boy. $5 up front for expenses, she said. When the job is done, there'll be another 5 waiting for you. Yeah, I figured she waltzed in from the rich end of town. For them, money is no object when they want something, and they buy people the way they buy things. Capitalism, left unchecked, sordid and mercenary. But business is business. I'm sure as hell not going to be changing society. So I just rock up and give Solara this and report back. The alluring grin again. I was hooked. Almost. But you must take a photo of Solara holding the envelope and send it to me. Then you come see me. Deal? Deal. I stood up, held my hand across the desk and was shook. As she was still holding it, she smirked at me and ran her tongue along her bright cerise lips. And when you visit to collect your payment, there could be some certain non-cash bonuses. I like detectives. I wanted to fuck her on my desk right now. But this lady knew her priorities, so even my deepest Kenmare charm would have been futile. I'd have to show some penile patience. I'll look forward to that, Carmen. You're a very beautiful lady. I always thought a compliment went down well, so it was obligatory behaviour in my books. Of course, in this era of slavish political correctness, I have come at Gutser on occasion, been rebuked, and even slapped. What the fuck sort of world have we landed in where a bloke can't tell a woman she's beautiful? Carmen smirked saucily. I'll take the compliment, Harry, but lose the lady description. She winked, blew me a kiss, and left my office. My erection and I stood in stunned silence.
Great choice. Thank you, Andrew. Did you coin that phrase, penile patience? Great. Okay. Wonderful. Look, I'm sure people are buzzing to ask a couple of questions here today. So I'm going to open up the floor. If anyone has got a question of Andrew, who would like to ask a question? You stunned everybody. All right, look, I might start with one here just to kick things off, Andrew. I always smile when I read one of the, I guess, what I call similes you make in the book. An example, and you've, I think, covered up a couple in your passages there, but an example I found which was very relevant to many of the corruption scenarios. His eyes said being mates with me was about as likely as finding integrity in Parliament. Integrity in Parliament is certainly a topical issue these days. Okay, but you do this very artfully, and you drop them in. You dropped them into all three books so far. I think without any repetition, they're all fresh and new. And I love coming across these as I'm reading through the book. But I'm intrigued as to how you come up with these. It reminds me very much of some of the British humour from years gone by. By the spur of the moment, are they things you draw upon? How do you do this?
Yeah, well, I think obviously I had a reasonable amount of British education, and we lived overseas. So I think I've always been influenced by British comedy, and I've always loved it. I think the similes and the metaphors as well. I mean, some are in Australian colloquialisms. So there's a few of them in the books. Others, yeah, you make them up as you go through the stories. But I think they can work well, and you obviously need to try and avoid the cliche ones. There are cliches out there, but no, look, I think it's, and that's a particularly good one, given the week we've just had in New South Wales. That was particularly appropriate, the one you picked out. I could have written it in the current week with the news that's going on, so where would it be without ICAC to provide some entertainment? And yeah, it's, I think I think it just shows that, or I can these things, it has that timeless element to it, because, look, I mean, corruption in New South Wales is the gift that keeps giving. It really is. It doesn't matter what happens in this state, and you can imagine how bad it would be without ICAC. But yeah, it really is the gift that keeps giving. We'll see how the current one plays out, but I will make a gratuitous comment here about integrity. You and I, Alan, having worked in the same professional field and worked together previously. I know we share views on this, but I think, and I get a bit sick and tired of politicians and senior government officials who say, I've got integrity, I haven't done anything wrong, I haven't broken the law. Now, without commenting on the current case, because I don't know all the facts, obviously, but what I will say to politicians is that simply saying that I haven't broken the law, I haven't done anything wrong, is not the same thing as having integrity. That is your basic fundamental obligation under the law. Integrity, in my view, is where you know or you suspect that something wrong is going on and you do something about it. That's real integrity.
Very well covered, absolutely. Any questions? Anyone thought of any?
Yep.
Cully, the better. Where was that? Oh, Michael.
My question would be, first question, I've actually got two, is why, you mentioned 21st century, why that time period? Why not earlier? Or, I mean, a lot of crime novels, and especially crime noir, is written in, much earlier times. Why particularly now?
I'll just repeat that for the purpose of everyone in the room. Michael asked, why the 21st century? Why now?
Alright, so do you mean why I set them now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Look, I think it's because I want to tell a contemporary story. Yeah, I mean, obviously noir and the whole pulp movement started, essentially. 20s going into the 30s, Hammett and Chandler, and MacDonald, and everything that flowed from there. That's all the hard-boiled, and it morphs with noir, and we probably don't want to get into a detailed discussion about the definitions of genres because we'll be here for ages and nobody agrees anyway.
That's right.
But no, I want to tell a contemporary story. I don't want to write historical stuff. So the novels are nominally set. I do have a nominal time frame whilst I don't state it in the novels. In terms of my own planning, have a nominal time frame. And that's important for writing because, and particularly now, because everything changes so quickly. And I even had to, there was, in one of the stories, I had to change one of the details about social media because I did my double checking and realised actually I was quoting something that was before its time, just. So you've got to be very careful with those sort of things. But no, I think because one of the motivations for me in terms of writing is I want to tell stories, yeah, sure, but I also want to talk about what happens out there, which is why I sort of hark back to things that I've seen or I've investigated, those sort of things. So I think setting in contemporary times, because to me part of writing is also about a message. I mean, it's not primary. I'm not there trying to deliver a lecture to people. Absolutely not. I'm there to try and tell stories. I think if you try and lecture people, most readers will close off and not want to read it. But crime fiction in particular gives you that avenue of making social comments, as you just heard a couple. So setting it in contemporary times, I think is that's. I want to also be putting out that message that this is what goes on out there, which wouldn't work for me if I went back and wrote historically. I mean, I've got nothing against writing historically, but for me it suits to set it currently. And the short stories, whilst again they don't have any stated time frame, they're all effectively written now. As I said, the thing you've got to be careful of is the technology in particular, is how things change. I mean, a writing group I was in for a while, and one of the other authors was reading some stuff they'd written, and it was set in the 80s, and the character pulls out their mobile phone. No. Now, of course, that was picked up in draft form, so that's fine, but they're the things you've got to be careful about, because the problem is, and again, if you do step back and start writing in another era, you've then got to think about, well, actually, what was in play at that time? Because even for all of us in this room, what's in play now is radically different from what was there in our childhoods, for instance. So you need to get that right. I mean, I'm a big stickler for detail like that. So I mean, one of my pet hates is crime writers who can't be bothered doing the research properly. And the number of times, and I would have read it in probably 4 or 5 instances, I've seen it where the characters pulled out a Smith & Wesson 38, which is one of the most common handguns in law enforcement history, and they take off the safety catch. They don't have a safety catch. And that to me is lazy writing. Because that's just, I mean, it's not hard to research those things. Particularly with the internet. And the research is easy these days. Even, I mean, the current Harry novel that I'm writing, the first episode is the team, Harry, Trev and Tanya, go to Laos on a hunt. I won't say any more about that. But even in terms of describing that, you can work out what the landscape looks around, and describing where they're driving from, because you go to Google Maps, you go to satellite view, you can bring up the street view, you can see all these wonderful things, which is really good from a research point of view. But no, writers who can't be bothered doing the research really annoy me. I'll turn off straight away, and I certainly won't read a second book of theirs if that's what they like. Does that answer that question, Ron?
Yep, I've got.
And the second bit was?
The second bit, well, the second question is, Harry is based. Who's he based on, or anyone in particular? Or
Inspiration.
You want to volunteer? Okay. But as I always say to that sort of ilk of question, I'm not Harry. Harry's not me. Having said that, I think most writers in this sort of genre, they're writing protagonists like there. I think if we're going to be honest, of course there's something of us in the character. Absolutely. The background to it. I mean, Harry's an ex-cop, was a detective sergeant. I'm an ex-detective sergeant. He got kicked out of the force. I left. honourably. Just that on the record, thank you. And I've got the certificate to prove it. But and obviously I don't have his background with having lost a child to pedophiles. Yeah, clearly in terms of the character, a lot of Harry's views, they are my views. So when you heard his bio read from his perspective, he hates bullies, he hates misogyny, he hates the establishment. Yeah, that's me as well, absolutely. So you are putting something of yourself into the character. But he's not me. He's not a direct representation of me. And I certainly haven't got up to all the things he's got up to. I want that on the record too. But yeah, so does that answer the question?
It does, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Peter.
I've got a question. I'm just wondering if you have any consideration that the work that you do is actually therapeutic for genes.
I might just repeat that. Peter asked if Andrew's given any consideration to whether the work he does is therapeutic for victims.
That's a fascinating question, Peter. I guess I'll start, as I'm trying to process the question, by saying it's therapeutic for me. But that's obviously not the question you asked. I think in terms of, I haven't thought about it in those terms before. Thinking about it now, I guess, and coming back to the theme I was talking about before, the quest for justice, which is one of those timeless themes in literature, but particularly crime literature as we now know it. But even you go back to classical literature, the quest for justice was the theme back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So I think in terms of therapeutic for victims, I think in terms of seeing some justice done, yeah, and that comes back to what I said before about having the PI character as opposed to writing about a cop. Because, and you've read both the novels, I know that. In the second novel, Harry goes hard for justice, and there's no shortage of brutality handed out. Now, of course, it's against the law. Is it ethical? Well, that's the whole different argument we can get into. He's going for justice. What he sees as justice for what he lost in terms of his daughter. So I think, potentially there is something. So I haven't thought about it before, but I mean, if people find it therapeutic in that respect, I think that's great. But it is about seeing justice done. Now, the novels. There's not everything's resolved by the end of the novels, as you know. Some things, I don't want to write a novel where everything's wrapped up sort of sweet, and everything's cool, and it's got that nice Hollywood finish at the end, because that's not what life's about. I know that's the formula, and another reason I'm probably never going to get on to Oprah. I won't follow the formula. But those who know me know that I don't follow formulas. Cheap seats over there, come on. But I think in terms of people being able to read that and see, well, this is where it goes, and yes, I do feel there's a bit of justice. So the short stories are a bit different because the nature of a short story is you need the story wrapped up at the end of it. The novels, of course, you can leave things unresolved because you know you're coming back. So, as you know, at the end of the second novel, there are still unresolved things, but you know there's another one coming. A short story is different because you have to go from woe to go and finish it. You can't have anything unresolved. When you might have a quirky or twisted ending, but you can't have anything unresolved in a short story because there's nothing to follow it. So look, I mean, I think trying to answer your question, I think if, in terms of being therapeutic for victims, I think seeing justice done, I think would be, and as we know in the real world, it doesn't always happen. So, does that answer the question?
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions? Yes, hi at the back.
So I understand that a third novel is on its way, and presumably as you set all your novels in current times, are you going to be incorporating coronavirus?
That's a very good question, very timely. So the question is, with the third one being out in current times, would it consider coronavirus?
Okay, I've actually got a fairly easy out on that one because the third novel, which is currently in progress, the time frame is actually before a couple of years. We're a couple of years off kilter with the novels in the current time. So the short answer is no, it's not going to encompass coronavirus. Obviously, as the novels go on, that's something I may need to look at. It's interesting, actually, this weekend, I was originally supposed to be in Sacramento for the BoucherCon conference this weekend, which of course got canned, but they had a whole lot of virtual stuff, so I've been getting up early in the mornings to catch the late afternoon sessions coming out of California online. And that was discussed, the whole subject around what are crime writers writing now, and are they incorporating the pandemic, because obviously it is something that's affected everybody in the world so significantly, and the effect is going to go on for quite some time, I've absolutely no doubt. So no, the next novel is not going to have to deal with that because the time frame is still short of the COVID pandemic. After that, maybe.
Do you think there's a demand from the general readership that they would like to read about coronavirus? Sorry to capitalise on that question, but it was a good one. Let's keep it on its toes.
I guess, look, personally I wouldn't be remotely interested in reading about it. I'm sick to death of the whole thing. And I think most people are, because it's, look, I'm not trying to be trite about it, because a lot of people have died. A lot more people are probably going to die. And it's having a devastating effect in many countries. I think we've been both very lucky here, and I think we've had some fairly good management. It's not like me to give any credit to politicians, believe me. But I think overall, I think Australia has had some fairly good management of it. A couple of debacles notwithstanding. And hence we haven't paid the price that a lot of other countries have. You know, look, I've got family in Paris. My brother-in-law is a surgeon in the hospital system over there. They're drowning it, literally. It's really bad. So yeah, I certainly don't want to make light of it. No, do I want to read about it? Not really, because I think I think everybody's affected by it. You know, a lot of people have lost jobs. We're going to see a lot of bankruptcies. We're going to see people losing homes. We're going to see a lot of damage for a long time to come. I'm not sure people want to read about that directly. And I certainly don't want to read about it. I think you know, the closest I want to come is reading some sort of dystopian novel about some fictional setting. I think if you want to make it too close to reality, I think that's problematic. I'm not sure that, look, I mean, I might be wrong, but I don't think that a lot of people are necessarily going to want to read fiction. Because look, one of the key reasons that those of us who like reading fiction, I love it, and I know that most people, if not all of you here, do, because that's why you're here. One of the reasons you read fiction is to escape. Now it might be fiction which is heavily realistic, you know, like a lot of the stuff I write, but you're still escaping. You're escaping into a story. I mean, there's no better feeling as a reader than to have one of those books here, and it's ticking over 1 a.m. on the clock by the bed, and you're thinking, I've got to get up at 6 in the morning to work, and I can't put the bloody thing down. You know, that's great. That's wonderful, because you are completely immersed in an alternative world. It might be a realistic world in terms of, you know, if you're writing realistic crime monster, but it's still a different world. And I think if you were to try and write fiction around the whole COVID pandemic, I don't think people there would be none of that appeal. I mean, I don't want to read about the COVID pandemic as somewhere to escape to, because we're living it. I mean, that's it. I think, you know, we need to be grateful in this country that we're not living it as hard as a lot of places. And you know, as much as I love America and I love the Americans, I mean, you know, their leadership over there, you know, really. I mean, that's a clown in charge. Yeah, and they're paying an appalling price.
Maybe 4 more years there.
Hey, please no. Please no.
Any other questions? Yes, Claire.
So love the fact you've done 2 novels and now gone to short stories, and you're working on your next novel. Are you going to continue with Harry as novels, or do you think there's a future of another short story book?
Okay, the question was, is Andrew going to continue with novels in the Harry framing, or will short stories feature again?
Okay, I'd actually made a whole lot of notes on what's next. We didn't get that discussion. What is next? Currently in progress, the third novel, Harry's Grail. Obviously, for those who've read the second novel, Harry's Quest, you would fully appreciate that by the end of that novel, the quest is not over. There's some serious, nasty work yet to be done. So that's what Harry's Grail is all about. So that's the third novel. Where I go after that, I'm yet to decide. I will tell you this, and it's not really a spoiler, but Harry won't be dying at the end of the third novel. So that's all I'll say. But I'll get to decide where to go with that. In terms of the short stories, yes, there will be more. I've really enjoyed writing the short story form since I got into it. So actually there is another short story, Harry short story, which has already been done, which is not in this volume. It's still in second draft form. And thank you to where to make the go of this. So there's a scene in there where Polish, there's some Polish language needed. And so Magda and her father helped me out with making sure I got the Polish right. Not a language I had any familiarity with. And some very bizarre letters and characters in Polish. But again, just adding a bit of level of realism to it. There's another novel, or novella, I should say, a shorter novel. I've been playing around for a while, which is not a Harry novel at all. It is a crime novel, and it's about child abuse and about corruption. That's something I need to try and get back into. Again, you're trying to juggle the different bits and pieces, and of course, if you're trying to write too many different things at once, it's sometimes a question of focus thing. And then the other project that I'm doing is, if you're familiar with my website, you may be familiar with the project that I'm running there called Cops Writing Crime, which is a page on my website, and I originally started about 3 years ago looking for ex-police generally, some still serving, who have taken to writing crime fiction, not true crime and memoirs. There's plenty of that out there, but this is crime fiction. So as a young uniform copper back in the 80s, I got my introduction to that reading Joseph Wombour and the Choir Boys and a few of the other novels, and he was ex-LAPD. And I really obviously loved the realism of it, and I've discovered a few since who I've read. So I started this project of collecting all these cops writing crime. I've ended up with nearly 300 on the website now, around the world. And so I came up with an idea to publish an anthology of short stories written by members of the Cops Writing Crime Group. So that project's currently in train, and to date I've got 10 stories submitted from various ex-cops, I think one's still serving, from around the world, who are crime writers as well, for that anthology, which I was hoping to have it out by the end of the year, but like everything this year, it's been delayed, and that'll be sometime next year. So that's another rather different project I'm working on. So yeah, I think that'll probably keep me busy next year. So third Harry novel, another set of Harry short stories, Cops Writing Crime anthology, and maybe the novella as well. Yeah.
Fantastic.
How do you fit it all in?
Not sure yet.
No, that's fantastic. I think it's great to know that there's so much more on the horizon, Andrew. Any more questions? Yes?
It's about Harry and it's about you, right? It's two parts. The first one is you're not Harry, Harry's not you. So you've got a line that you won't cross, and Harry's got a line that he won't cross. The first part of the question is, in that no man's land in between, is that where you get personal satisfaction of being able to not cross your line but live in that area? And the second part, given that Harry is working or striving to correct some serious wrongs, would you ever allow him to fall across the line and bring him back? Or would that make him a little bit less violent?
I don't know if I could repeat that answer. I don't know if I do it justice, but I might ask you to maybe cover it off in your answer.
All right, thanks for that, Eric. The first bit about me versus Harry and lines, etc. First bit's probably the easier part of the question to answer. Yes, I mean, Harry has lines. Harry's not amoral. He's got an ethical code. It may not match neatly with what society might want as an ethical code. It certainly won't match neatly with what current trends are and what would be required for him to feature on Oprah. But that's fine. It's not the character I want to write anyway. So yes, he's got lines. So he you will never see anything from Harry which is disrespectful of women. Yes, he might bed an awful lot of women, but there's nothing disrespectful about that. And I think that's one of those subject areas, because a lot of crime, well, a lot of writers, but certainly a lot of crime writers won't go near sex. You know, the most you might get is that they disappeared in and closed the door. Well, you know, for those who've read any Harry, you know you get the full you get the full deal. You're in the bedroom, and I'll make no apology for that. I think so you won't see him disrespecting women. You won't see him being racist. It's the lines that he won't cross, and those are things that obviously come out of my set of values as well. You will see him, and coming back to your first part of your question, you will see him obviously crossing other lines in relation to what society will put there. So, I mean, Harry kills people. Yeah, of course there's a line that's crossed. But from his own code of ethics and his own pursuit for justice, he would justify that. Now, from my personal perspective, no, I've never killed anybody. So, but to circle back to what you said is, do I get some satisfaction out of doing that? Yeah, of course. And that's one of the joys of writing crime fiction, that you can have your character serve up all sorts of justice that, you know, as an ex-detective, an ex-cop, you know, you would have loved to have served up a whole lot of justice that you couldn't, because you would have ended up in prison. So, that's the reality of it. So yes, but there is satisfaction in terms of writing that, because again, it comes back to the point I made about having a PI rather than a cop as a main character. Your PI can transgress those rules, and hopefully you still keep your reader with you as thinking, yes, yeah, I know Harry's about to kill somebody, but that person deserves it, I'm with Harry. And that's what you want. Whereas, of course, if you have a cop as a character doing that, then immediately people are conflicted, thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's a cop. They're not supposed to do that. The PI makes that line easier. So yes, I cross the line, Harry crosses the line there, and I absolutely get some therapy out of that. There's an awful lot of justice handed out in the Harry books. And because so much of it is based on things I've seen or experienced in my own life, there's a bit of vicarious justice being served out there. I think in relation to the second part of your question, which was, would I ever have Harry cross any lines, and how would I bring him back?
Well, would you let it cross his line and then bring him back, or would that make him less reliable as the character that you've got?
My personal view on that is that, as flawed as Harry is, he has his lines, and that's what defines him as a human being, as a character, obviously. But, and I think if you then had Harry crossing a line, let's for instance, I mean Harry is clearly he's not racist. You know, he's not homophobic. And we obviously see that in the second book. For those, I don't want to spoil it, but for those who read the second book, you're well aware of you know, a character who's close to him in that respect. So, but I would never have him cross those sort of lines, because that then undermines what you created as a character. And yeah, I mean, it does come back to, you want your readers to, whilst they might have some reservations, you do want them to inherently like your character. I mean, I love it when I see a review that says, oh yeah, it's hard hitting and all the rest of it, but you know, yeah, I did like Harry despite all his faults. Perfect. That's fine. I mean, I'm not there trying to create, you know, the hero, you know, Superman type of mold or anything like that. He's got his flaws, absolutely. And I think that's far more interesting, because I think your flawed hero is far more interesting as a character than your goody two-shoes. Absolutely. And that's what I find is, you know, a fair bit of modern crime writing, and it's reflected on our TV shows and that sort of stuff, is you get these very sort of correct, you know, good characters. And well, apart from the fact that it's boring entertainment, it's also not that real, I don't think. And I think back to my own police career, you know. Those colourful detectives were far more interesting than anybody else. You know, so does that cover the second part of your question, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Okay, so no, I think Harry has to have his lines, because that's him as a character. And I think if you get your character to cross their own lines, I think it's probably impossible to then bring them back and still keep the reader with you in terms of liking your character.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions? Okay, well, nicely covered.
So
yes.
the speaking to Harry, not to him. How would Harry see himself represented outside the context of a book? So would Harry see himself replicate himself in other forms of media or other sort of forms of I don't know.
How would Harry see himself outside the context of a book?
If he wasn't in a book, where else would he do?
Okay, so how will I see Harry outside of the book? And it actually it harks back to Eric, the question before, interviewed me on Eastside FM the other afternoon, and we covered this very topic. Look, I'd love to see Harry on the screen. I mean, look, there's not a writer in the world who could sit there and say, oh no, I don't want to see my book on film or screen. They're lying, you know. Of course you would. I think that the Harry short stories certainly would lend themselves to a series type format. But the novels, because the novels, as you know, are written in episodes, so again, you could very easily serialise that, or you could make a movie. I'm easy either way. Show me the money. But I think, to me, the biggest challenge would be, apart from getting somebody interested, would be the authenticity of it. So what I wouldn't want is for somebody to take the Harry stories, apply the political correctness filter over it, and then put it on the screen. I hate it. You know, it's part of the element of it. It's in your face. It's real. It makes no apologies, and I make no apologies for it. So I wouldn't want it to turn into some vanilla, correct, you know, TV drama that everybody thinks, oh yeah, that was quite entertaining. No. You know, I want people to read the stories and feel that they've been smacked in the guts. That's, you know, that to me is hard-boiled and noir crime writing. You know, not anything that's nice and cosy. I mean, look, if people want to read cozies and you have the English lady detective having afternoon tea with the vicar and they're talking about that awful murder down the village. Well, fine. If that's what cooks your goose for you, go for it. It doesn't cook mine, and I've got no interest in reading it or watching it, and I've certainly got no interest in writing it. Go hard or go home, as they say. So I think. Yes, I'd love to see the stuff on screen in some form, whether it was on small screen in a serialised form or whether it was on big screen. I'd love to see it there. But I would want to have some control, is probably the wrong word, because I don't think you'd end up, contractually, you might not end up having any control, but I certainly want to have input, because I want it to be authentic. I want it to be Harry. I want people to go there, if it's a cinema or sit in front of TV, watch it and think, oh yeah, that was just like what I read, and see it brought to life. In terms of who I'd like to be Harry, Ruth asked me this question years ago after the first novel, as we were out walking one afternoon, and I straight away said Russell Crowe.
Yes.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. He's got that roughness to him. He's also got an element of smartness to him. He would pull Harry off to a T. So.
Does he have penile patience?
I can't answer for Rusty on that one, and
Sorry, but what you and I have shared the story. You know why I haven't read it, but therapeutically, it's great. I would think live, as from a therapy point of view, would be as in live theatre. Prior to screen might give you that control at your test, some kind of try it before you buy it if it goes to like a small intimate theatre with the nice design of it. But I haven't read the material, and you know why. So from a therapy point of view, I would come to them, but I can't read books. I want to get more, and you know what? Yeah.
That's what we did back with the Wollongong ICAC inquiry, if you remember, 10 years ago. Do you remember that? The table of knowledge? I'll make a bit of time now. Does anyone know Rusty, by the way? Question building on that. I know we've talked about it at the previous book launch about having Russell Crowe, and I know you make no secret of having him as your lead actor. Have you thought about a director? Because Quentin Tarantino type genre would be the one that would come to mind. I wonder if that's crossed your mind. I don't know.
Oh, it's great.
No, it hasn't. I was wondering whether you wanted to take a departure from your PhD stream there. But you might be angling for it, mate. Another career there, Alan? For a director. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, look, there's... Well, truth to the top, I mean, I love Clint Eastwood as a director. You know, and look, I mean, you know, you look at... I love him as an actor too, but I mean, especially as a director. So I mean, and one which is sort of similar on sort of storyline, Mystic River, which Eastwood directed, was a brilliant crime film. Oh look, I mean, there's plenty of great directors out there. You know, I'd like to see an Australian do it. Oh, maybe Philip Noyce or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, I haven't thought too much about that one, but yeah, Russell definitely. Russell's Harry.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions? All covered? Wonderful. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I wrap up?
No, I'll say some thank yous at the end, and then we'll once we'll finish the video, and then we'll do the raffle.
Super. Okay. Look, if there's no more questions of Andrew, then look, please stick around, and please accept our sincere thanks for coming today. It's really great to see so many people here, especially during these COVID times, and to have this event sold out was really great. I think Andrew, I know, was very happy. Ruth is going to manage the raffle in a minute of anthology magazines. That's quite right, is it? Ruth looked a bit shocked there, sorry. I thought I'd call you off guard. I just wondered if Andrew prepped you, so wonderful. So please stay and have a drink, and if you would like to speak to Andrew more personally about the book or any of his influence in developing the stories, please grab him afterwards, and I know we'd only be too happy to chat these through with you further, and most likely over another drink. Absolutely. So, yep, book sales and signing will commence momentarily. And once again, look, just to formally close, Andrew, I'd just like to congratulate you once again, A.B. Patterson, raise a glass to say for the hope Harry Kenmare, PI, has most success.
Okay, well I just want to say thank you very much for all of you for coming along today, and again thanks to the hotel for hosting the event within all the rules. Please do stick around. Bar's on me for as long as people want to hang around and chat and socialise and buy books and just... I never said I made any money out of this. Anyway, no, it's about the event, it's about celebration, and you know, I mean, given what we've been through this year, it's great to actually get people together and do something vaguely normal. Not that I'm quite sure anybody called Harry normal, but you know, as it allows. Now, what we are going to do, before you all get up from your seats, we are going to draw the raffle. I'm going to kill the video first, so that as we call names out, your names are not recorded on the thing, just out of respect for privacy. So, we'll draw the raffle in just a moment.